Right now, we have a commission that is looking at our future there. We have two great presenters today. Probably both are known to you, but one probably is special. The Reverend Bev Crow, who has a deep involvement in the Warm Springs Reservation. And then the Reverend Jim Boyce. Now, Jim and I go clear back to seminary. We overlap in seminary, but I won't tell you who's the oldest. You can guess for yourselves about that one. Anyway, Viv, Jim, you're on. Jim's been around this presbytery for a long time. Not quite as long as I have, but almost. Served churches in Portland, Milwaukee, back to Portland, and then retired. Welcome.
So we are both really glad to be here. We are both serving on a Presbyterian Administrative Commission. And what that really means is for a congregation is that the commission becomes the session of the church. Because for one reason or another, the church can't do that. In this case, the Warm Springs Church is tiny. And so we've been asked to be a commission to work with the Warm Springs and to explore a possible future. And Beverly Crow is the chair of the Administrative Commission, and so she gets to start.
Thank you all for inviting us to be here because I know it's not a well-used term with Presbyterians, but Jim and I are on a project that's called evangelism. And that is to go around to all of our churches, as many as possible, to let them know about Warm Springs, about the needs at Warm Springs, and to be involved in this church that is part of the presbytery, but is little known to many people. So we're trying to shift that and change that. And this transition in their pastoral leadership is an excellent time for all of this increased knowledge about Warm Springs to take place. So I am chair of the Administrative Commission, as Jim just said. But this is not my first engagement with Warm Springs. And so to understand sort of my passion, my involvement, I need to talk a little bit about myself, and that's not very easy or what I usually kind of do. So as I just said, this is not just an assignment for me because Warm Springs became part of my life work many, many years ago. And I won't have to go into all of the details, but I'll give you a rough overview of part of my life, and you'll see why Warm Springs is close to my heart. After Dave and I had been married for a while, and we had our first child while he was still in seminary, and he did an intern year at Oregon State Campus Ministry, and then went back to Louisville to finish seminary with our young baby, and then graduated. Looked around for the possibility of where to go and be ordained, and lo and behold, Oregon State Chaplain Ministry opened up as an ordained position. So we headed back to Corvallis with our infant and got established there. It was a good place. And just an aside, and this is, just a tidbit, but life of graduating students and so on was we were pretty tight financially. So Dave got this position in at Oregon State chaplaincy area, and we needed a little bit more money. So I became the Sunday evening cook for all of the students that came. I had no experience in that, but I knew how to make sloppy joes and that kind of thing. So it worked and had a crib in the kitchen as I was working and doing that. Um, so that was our life for a while. And then we decided, we didn't want just one child. But we had heard enough about world concerns. We lived out of some Christian ideas as to how to be faithful people. And for us, we came to the decision that we should not have more children to overpopulate the world. So we looked into adoptions. Came to Portland for a meeting, and we were, there were several prospective parents there. And we were all given a piece of paper to fill out, and Dave and I looked at this and said, none of this fits. What color, your eyes, your hair, everything else about you. And so we called the worker over and said, this just doesn't fit for us. We don't care about matching. We just want a child that needs a home. Her eyes got real big and she said, let's go into a different room here. And so we were whisked into a room where just the three of us had a lengthy conversation. And she thanked us very much for being there, and she would be in touch with us. When we exited the building and walked out into, I still remember it so vividly. It was a warm, sunny August day. And we got back out on the sidewalk, and Dave put his arm around me and he said, well, hon, I think you're about 8.5 months pregnant, by the way that goes. And he was off for by a month or so. And we got a call that there was this infant girl. She was Native American, and she was now out of the hospital. She had been checked over thoroughly for 2 days, and we needed to come and get her tomorrow. I said, well, our son is really sick with a bad cold, and I'll have to see if I can find a sitter that quick. No, you bring your son with you. He has to be here. And I said, but he's got to, I don't care. He has to be here. So we loaded up, came to Portland, had a wonderful get together with this baby girl that we named Heather, and found out she was from Warm Springs. Her heritage is from Warm Springs. So for over 50 years, I won't reveal her age exactly, but for over 50 years, we have been, Dave and I and our family has been part of Warm Springs. Down the road, we met her birth family, and finally, when she was ready, she met somebody from the tribe. They got married. We blended. She and her husband had lived, they lived in Salem for a while, but they have lived in Warm Springs for a long time. So it's kind of my second home. I'm there frequently, know the people, and Jim and I have been working closely with their church session, a few of them, to make our administrative commission in a pastoral change time. And on we go with that story. But I think it helps just to know some of my personal history. This is not just a committee assignment for me. It is that, and I take it very seriously to represent all of you in this task of pastoral change at Warm Springs. But to me, it's also a personal task because I've known this church and some of the people for a very long time. So our commission's been busy at work for a while now. We've gotten to know each other. We've gotten to know the tribe, and Jim's going to fill you in on some of the history of the tribe, its formation, some of the rules and regulations, and we'll go on from there. Jim.
I suspect that many of us know where it is, but I'm going to walk around with this map just so we have an understanding. Warm Springs is this gray spot right here in the state of Oregon. And what we need to understand is that essentially this is another country that exist in Central Oregon. This is not part of Oregon in a sense. The Warm Springs Reservation has its own government, which I'll talk about, its own rules. Bev likes to tell the story of if you have an accident on the Warm Springs Reservation, the people from Madras will not come and help you. The people from Warm Springs come and help you because it's their country. So if you need assistance, if you speed and get caught on the Warm Springs Reservation, it's the Warm Springs Police Department that will give you the ticket, not the state patrol, because it's not their land. When I first started on this venture, I didn't know a whole lot about Warm Springs, and part of the reason why I said yes to being asked was because I wanted to know. I was curious about it. Yes, I had known it was there. Yes, I had known the previous pastor off and on. You all know I've been here a long time, and so I've known some of these folks, but what did I know? Almost nothing. So for me, it's been, I hope, a learning experience. I just wanted to learn and to learn about these people and their church. So here's some history that I didn't know. The Warm Springs is home to 3 tribes: the Warm Springs, the Wasco, and the Northern Paiute tribes. Before 1855, they all lived separately. Traditionally, the Warm Springs lived along the tributaries of the Columbia and the Deschutes and the John Day rivers. They depended on roots and game and berries for their survival. The Wasco lived along the Columbia River, around Hood River and the Dalles. And they were primarily fishers and traders and farmers. And they traded up and down the river, which also meant they were trading north and south. They were the foremost traders in the area because of where they were. They had this highway, this water highway. The Northern Paiutes, they lived in the Northern Great Basin in southeastern Oregon. So they're way over there. And the Paiutes migrated a lot because they were hunter-gatherers and they were fishers, and so they had to keep moving for that. While the Warm Springs and the Wascos traditionally had peaceful relationships with each other, they traded with each other, they knew each other, neither had peaceful relationships with the Northern Paiute. Are you beginning to hear something? I didn't know this. During the 1800s, waves of us, our ancestors, or some of our ancestors, came through this whole territory, and they began to settle in the tribes' territories. And they inadvertently brought diseases with them. 80 to 90% of the Wasco and Warm Springs people died as a result. Let that sink in a minute. 80 to 90% of that civilization died. Smallpox arrived in the late 1770s, a malaria-like disease in the 1830s, which claimed almost 90% of the people along the Columbia. Think about that. Think about the shared trauma of that and what it does to any kind of relationships, any kind of survival, any kind of where do we find meaning and how can there be a future. In 1844, scarlet fever, whooping cough, dysentery, and typhoid, and in 1848 along came the measles. Over and over and over, diminishing, wiping out. These are peoples who had lived there for tens of thousands of years. From 1843 to 1852, the number of whites passing through the territory increased from about 1,000 a year to 12,000 a year. and some of them stayed along the way. So in 1855, you're gonna have a test on this when I'm done. In 1855, Joel Palmer, who was the superintendent of the Oregon Territory, which was enormous, was ordered by the federal government to clear the Indians from their lands, what was left of them. That year, the Warm Springs and the Wasco tribes ceded 10 million acres to the federal government in exchange for 464,000 acres. The 10 million acres that they had lived on for tens of thousands of years, they were forced to give up for 464,000. And for the rights to self-govern and for the rights to fish off the reservation and to farm that land. Now, those of you that have been to the Warm Springs know what rich agricultural land that is. I mean, we know where it is. It's on the other side at Madras. Going from the Warm Springs to Madras, there are plowed fields out. I have yet to see a plowed field. 1874, the Warm Springs Presbyterian Church was founded. So last year was the 150th anniversary. That's an old church. 1878, the Bannock Indian War. Anybody know about the Bannock Indian War? It's where the government fought the Paiutes, or the Paiutes fought the government, or they fought each other. And finally, the government defeated the Northern Paiutes, these very unfriendly folks to the Wascos and the Warm Springs. And they imprisoned a bunch of them, and they sent a bunch of them to the Yakima Reservation, what was left of them. And then in the early 1800s, the government, in its wisdom, decided that they didn't belong there, but that they should have the Northern Paiutes join the Warm Springs and the Wasco on the reservation here. So they moved them all here, out of prison and off the reservation in the Yakima Reservation. Think about that dynamic a moment, because what had happened previous to that war was that the Northern Paiutes had continued to raid the Warm Springs and the Wasco on the reservation. And now the government says, no, you get to live with each other. This is a dynamic that's been going on the reservation for a long, long time, and also helps us understand who they are and how they function. I didn't know this. Life on the reservation was extremely difficult. The reservation could not provide enough salmon, and we know that area. The national goal at that point for indigenous people was to help them across our country become Americans, our kind of Americans, and to fit into the dominant culture. It's easy for me to sort of condemn that stupidity, but the fact is that I find they were being incredibly sincere, and I have to give them credit for that. They were trying to say, how do we help these poor people? They look down on them as not very good, but poor people be able to function well in our society. Well, we have to teach them to be like us. Makes sense to me. We hear from time to time about the boarding schools, including the ones at Warm Springs. There were two, and one of them is right across the street and down the block from our church. It's still there. Last year, President Biden issued an apology, the first president to do this, to the schools who ripped children from their homes and their families, cut off their hair, forced them to speak English and not their own language, and physically punished a lot of them for not assimilating. Biden apologized. The Warm Springs schools follow the similar pattern across the country. Their curriculum pushed an assimilationist kind of program aimed at erasing their culture and replacing it with the new America. Given the traumatic nature of that process, the pupils and their parents responded in all kinds of ways. Some cooperated, some openly resisted assimilation and they ran away. Others showed up, but didn't perform very well. Because like on the Warm Springs Reservation, the best students, the really good ones, got sent to the Chippewa School in Salem to move on. More separated, more isolated from their families and from their culture. A number of parents resisted the pressure. Some parents also wanted education in both cultures. Listen to these words from Vesta Johnson, a person that Bev knows on the reservation. She says, "My heart aches for my elders because I know they went through a lot. The elders that are still alive, they help you now. You can't forget that generational atrocity has impacted their children and their children's children." Johnson's mother, Ginger Smith, was sent to the Warm Springs boarding school. As a kid, she was called Jabberjaw because she talked a lot and she was full of playful energy. When she was at the boarding school, she got in trouble for talking too much in class. They put her mother in a corner, feet and hands bound with a rope and a cloth covering her mouth. She was left in the corner the entire day, not even allowed to use the bathroom. After such traumatic experiences, she said that her mother in her adult life became much quieter and very reserved all through her adult life. That's trauma response. And it happened to all of them. They live with the results of that today because trauma gets passed on generation to generation. We're learning about that too. We don't know about that. Dolores Jimerson, behavioral health educator in Portland, said, "There is so much pain and grief that many of us carry in our bloodline. I do not know a single tribal person who has not had a relative in a boarding school." One of the things that the Administrative Commission is learning is the reality of this generational trauma, which permeates the reservation. An expert in the field says everyone is a victim. We know that there are actual changes that happen to the DNA from wounds, ancestral family wounds from generations back, and that we carry the wounds of our ancestors in our bodies. Generational trauma. This is part of the living reality at Warm Springs. 1924, Native Americans received the citizenship to vote. I could make a political comment here, but I'll keep going. Just watch that one in the news. 1937, the Indian Reorganization Act happened nationally, so that in 1938, the three tribes incorporated and they adopted a constitution and formed a government. It's composed of a chief of each of the three tribes, chief for life, regardless of ability to serve. Just remember that. And a council of 8 elected members. There's also a judicial system on the reservation. They have their own judges and everything. From the beginning, the reservation's boundaries have been in dispute, not a surprise. Finally, in 1972, they were resolved, and the reservation ended up with 644,000 acres, 1,019 square miles. In the 2000 census, there were 3,314 inhabitants. across the space. And in 2003, the total tribal enrollment was 4,200. What I've learned is that poverty pervades these people. Heather describes the reservation as a third world country in the middle of Oregon. Substance abuse of all kinds is rampant. So is unemployment. With the substance abuse comes everything else that goes with substance abuse. It's part of the reality that's lived there. Here's an idea of one of the challenges of living there, and it has to do with distance. A former member on the commission lives 20 miles from the church. Heather and her husband, Danny, live about 14 miles from the church. Neither of them live on the edge of the reservation. It keeps going beyond them. And the people that live there, except for the ones that live right in the center, have to deal with that kind of mileage all the time. It's 14 miles to Madras to a significant grocery store. So we've been at this on the administrative commission for 18 months, or 20 months now. And
Who's counting?
and we continue to learn things. I think we're guided by a question. Our work is, how do we make space for God to create something new in this place of overwhelming need and huge opportunity? The previous minister was there for 30 years,
30.
at least 30, 35 years. And what we know, Bev is there often. What we know is that we're looking at a congregation of maybe a dozen people, most of whom are elderly and poor. It's our only mission church in the Presbytery. We have no other. And there are a whole lot of things that have happened over the last years. And there are a lot of dynamics that we're learning about that have taken place. But what we know is, I can say, basically, it's also been a victim of our neglect. We've just sort of let it be because it wasn't squeaking loudly enough, and there were other wheels squeaking much louder around the presbytery. How do we, as the dominant culture, relate to people whose lives and history are so unlike our own? For example, their religion stresses the spirit in all things, animate and inanimate. For example, this is a storytelling culture. Nothing like decently and in order. If you want to get something done there or build a relationship, the first thing you need to do is to hear the story, the person's story. And it may take a couple of hours before you get to ask the question you want to ask. One of the things that means is we can't be Presbyterian in our way there. Because in our way, we just bring in a transitional pastor, an interim pastor, and get things done. And their session would do this, and they'd have these and these and this and done. That's not that culture in any way, we are learning. How many members do they have? Recently, I learned they basically don't have any members, because that's not how their tribes operate. Maybe the place on their reservation where there are members might be a child's soccer team. Other than that, they don't talk about membership because it has to do with community and with relationships. And that's what happens. The community gathers for worship. The members don't gather for worship. So this church has membership rolls, and the session reviews them every year, and you have to pay per capita on the number of members, right? You've been on session, you know this. There are no membership rolls at Warm Springs that we have found. We cannot find any. Per capita doesn't make sense to them because it has to do with members and numbers. We're learning about that. How can we get out of the way and let something birth new in Warm Springs that's not us? You're hearing a bit of our challenge and our hope. What I know is that we receive repeated testimony from people in the community that the church has been and continues to be an island of hope, of safety, and of faith. We get into community groups periodically, and everybody has a story about somebody in their family and that church, and how good it's been to them, and how much they value it. And so we are repeatedly urged by the Spirit to say, no, God wants to do something here. Something needs to happen here. And we don't know what it is yet. From the people in the community that talk to us, currently there is no pastor of any congregation living on the reservation. None. So what about the future? Well, actually, it's pretty exciting. It's quite amazing. It's miraculous in some respects. The presbytery late last year reaffirmed its relationship with the Warm Springs Presbyterian Church as the Presbytery's mission church. That hasn't been done for decades. Much of the presbytery didn't know that the church existed until that happened. One of the things we know is we will not be able to find a future there of any kind, discover what it is, until we can get a staff person there, a pastor or a CRE there, because, remember what I keep saying over and over, it has to do with relationships. Beverly, bless her heart, for the last 20 months has made sure that there was somebody preaching there every Sunday, except for a couple of snow ones, because our first commitment as an administrative commission was to make sure worship continued. And so this faithful group gathers every Sunday, and it happens. It's happening right now. David Hutchinson, whom most of you know, really enjoys going over there and has done it several times. That was our first commitment. But a person coming on Sunday and leaving can get to know a few of the members by name and recognize, but it's not relational enough. We have to have somebody living there, because it has to do with trust, with telling stories and sharing life to discover what God might want to do. So we then looked at the manse, which is next door. It's a nice solid house. It has really good bones, and it was uninhabitable. Example, there wasn't a 3-prong plug in the place. Okay. So we decided to raise $150,000 for the 150th anniversary. That shouldn't be difficult from the whole presbytery, to put in a new electrical system and plumbing and flooring and things like that. So we raised enough money to start the electrical system going, And the contractor came in and we signed the contract and they went up in the attic and said, we're not going there. Because it had been over the years totally infested with mice. And so that meant $10,000 more to get hazmat people in there, to get all that stuff out of the attic, and it started to snowball. And about this point, the Presbyterian Trustees Building Committee got involved. Thank God. Because they have money. Some money. So where are we now with the manse? We know we can't do anything until we can get a pastor there. They have to have a place to live. Currently, well, next Wednesday, the presbytery is going to be asked to commit significant funding from some reserves from a congregation whose building has been sold. Where are we now? All of the rats are gone. All the mice are gone. All the electrical system's gone. All of the walls are gone. We're down to studs. And that's amazing progress. I mean, we didn't know we weren't going to do all this. The trustees' commitment is to build, keep the same place, but make it environmentally sound with insulation and double pane walls and all of that good stuff and appliances that work and heating systems that work and electrical systems that work, and furnish it so that it will be ready for somebody to come maybe by summer. Maybe. And that's astonishing. Part of the result of all of this that we've done over the months is that the people there now don't feel abandoned or alone. They now feel incredibly supported and encouraged because of all of us in the rest of the presbytery, which they haven't for a long time. And so they're pretty encouraged and they're pretty grateful. Heather keeps talking about how grateful she is. Part of the reality of what we're living with, our team met this last Tuesday. This is an empty house. It's back to studs. It has virtually no electricity in it. There's nothing in it. And it got broken into a second time. So last Thursday, the glass people from Madras were to come out and give us an estimate about how much it will cost to replace the sliding glass door to the outside. That's twice. They also will be replacing another window that got broken earlier. That's part of the reality of living. What's happening in response is, again, tribal and unlike what would happen for us. Heather's husband, Danny, is a whole other story. Some of you know him. He's an amazing man. But with his leadership, he has visited the tribal council and the police department there in the last week and said, excuse me, you're not doing your job. You're responsible for the safety of these buildings and we expect you to do it. So they've increased their patrols. There are 2 outbuildings that are essentially hazardous. Some of them have had hazardous materials in them and they need to be removed. And on Tuesday, one of the trustees said, we need to figure out how to do that. And Danny said, don't worry about it. The tribe is getting rid of the hazardous waste and burying it in our landfill. And in March, we have a team of people from the tribes who are going to dismantle and haul away these 2 sheds. What about security? Oh, well, he was excused from being in church last Sunday because he and another person that works with him bought fencing material and they're going to fence around the back of the house and put up no trespassing signs. And they have ordered battery operated cameras and and motion detectors to help people not break in from the backside of the manse. we aren't doing this. They're doing this on our behalf because of the importance of this place for the reservation. That's really moving to me. They're doing it gratis because they care about the well-being of the church, therefore of the reservation and the people there. And they want us to be able to be back there. That's wonderful and amazing to me. So that's where we are. We still need funding. And, you know, I thought about that $150,000. In the great scheme of things, that's not much money. And from the whole presbytery, that's really not much money. If 1,000 of us across this whole presbytery gave $150, we'd have it. Or if 100 of us, and there are at least 100 of us in the presbytery that could do it, gave $1,500, we'd have it. Right? Seems not too hard. So here's some cards. If you want to give to the presbytery, there's a QR code or an address to join us in sharing this. Bev, you want to say some more?
Yeah, I'll say a couple more things, and then if people have questions.
Yeah.
We'll
I
move
think
to
we've got what,
questions.
about 15 minutes?
Okay. Let me just say a couple more things. I know that standing here, who you see. What you don't see in just looking at me is a parent of 3 kids, 3 races. One was born to us, and his whole life he didn't know how to deal with the fact that he looked so like his mother. How do you be a guy and look like your mother? So that was his burden in life. And then we adopted Heather, Native American, got her when she was, we always argued whether she was 3 or 4 days. I can't remember which side of the argument was mine and which side was Dave's, but anyway, just, she had already been out of the hospital 2 days and was healthy. So we got her when she was 3 or 4 days. We moved to northern Michigan from Oregon and for Dave's first parish kind of job. And after a while decided we wanted one more child in our family and started looking around and prowling around and found a way to adopt interracially again. And so we added to our family at that time, a 2-year-old had absolutely just the day before turned 2, African-American boy, Mike. So I stand here and I look like most of you. But I have mothered, parented 3 kids of 3 different races. And I see the world very differently. Mike has some disabilities and a few years ago moved into the house next door to us so that there can be he can help me out, but I can help him out at points too. So I see the world. And I walk in here immediately, I size a group. I've learned this from my kids to know how comfortable they would be in this setting. I don't say that to make anybody feel guilty or bad. This is a reality. You look at me and I look like most of you. I'm not seeing the rest of you in the same way. Part of me is Native American. Part of me is Black through my kids. And part of me is Caucasian, and I know what it is to raise a white male. And I don't say that to put any blame any place, except to open eyes that the world looks different. Groups look differently. I know immediately when my kids know when they walk into a convention center of several hundred people, if they're welcome and going to feel comfortable. I've learned to live my life with that kind of vision. Again, I don't say that with any kind of blame, just an awareness kind of thing. The other piece of awareness that I want to lift up for you is unlike Jim, who was a pastor for many, many years in one place and knows that, I am an ordained Presbyterian clergy. I have never been installed in a congregation. I served 13 interims in my career. I know anxiety. I know how to deal with sessions that are anxiety charts. I have lived now for a year and a half very closely with the Warm Springs congregation. And I have told them on 2 or 3 occasions, it goes over their head and they don't care. So I need to stop saying it. I have yet to find anxiety. Now just live with that a bit. As an interim in these kinds of congregations that look like you, I had to learn a whole lot about moderating anxiety. In a year and a half, I have yet to find anxiety in that situation. Oh, the presbytery has us. As a congregation, they are so accepting of what is. And time to be together, to sing some songs, to say some prayers, to hear maybe some important words. So I've learned basic gratitude that I just pass on. It might be something to consider as a different way of life. Just wanted to add those pieces, and also that people of different races live in our culture very differently. My Black son is terrified sometimes to get out and drive. He's been pulled over for no reason. It's a different world than those of us sitting here primarily know. I don't say this to make any of us feel guilty, just awareness. So you see me, I know what I look like. I can look in the mirror every morning to see if my hair's combed. Internally, I'm a very different person than I look like publicly. So on with that, that's enough of that. Let's move on with any questions that people have.
Any questions or responses? Louis?
Is there a backstory to why the Presbytery has maintained Warm Springs as a mission church as opposed to a church?
The backstory is that because of where it is, it could never be self-sufficient. Economically, it could never carry its weight. It would never be big enough or have enough money there to do that. But people financial,
Yeah.
implies financial support.
Offering on a Sunday might be $10.
Larry?
2 questions, one concern, I guess, one question, one concern. Is there not a Warm Springs tribe? But there are 3 tribes living on the Warm Springs Indian Reservation? Is that?
Yeah. There is a Warm Springs tribe. It's one of the 3.
It's one of the 3.
Yeah.
And I have been told by several Indian colleagues of mine over the years, don't call us Native Americans. That's a white man's term. We call ourselves Indians. I don't know if there's anything to that. That's just these people's opinion.
I don't know that.
We haven't been told that.
Okay,
The Yakima prefer to be called native.
not Native Americans.
It's native.
Is there any thought about trying to integrate Christianity with their indigenous religion somehow? I mean, it seems like that would be sort of a barrier maybe to people feeling fully integrated into the Presbyterian church.
We have not had opportunity to explore that particularly, but what we can tell you is that historically, let's say there is somebody dies. And so there's a funeral at the Presbyterian Church, and then there is the longhouse ceremony. And everybody participates in both
Yeah.
because they both,
Yeah.
they're one.
They integrate it,
Yeah, they integrate.
however, and differently. Not all of them would integrate it the same way.
Yeah, Louise? There are several church buildings in Warm Springs. We haven't had opportunity to explore what kind of congregations they are or if they're functioning. Just the conversation I had with one of the women said there are no other pastors. That church, that, I think it's Baptist.
Yeah, there's a Baptist.
Functions, but there's no pastor there. And I said, yeah, but what about the Catholic Church up on the hill? Which you drive, when you drive by, you see that cute little church. Maybe once a month somebody comes. I never see anybody there.
So it's the only functional church.
Yeah,
When, as we think of church, they have powwows, organizations, they have burial ceremonies. They do gatherings that we wouldn't call church. They wouldn't name it that way, but it provides that.
sure. Mark,
I seem to remember back in, I think, the 90s, that the Presbyterian Church, or the Presbyterian did something about encouraging or supporting the logging on the reservation.
It's no longer there.
yeah, the sawmill is no longer there. One of the things that, again, we learned, because it's an independent country, it continues to do some logging and has agreements with Japan to ship logs. Doesn't have to go through us. And so there is some of that. There is the casino, for better or for worse. Remember what I said about abusive things? That fits in with encouraging that kind of thing. And Canada recently reopened. Those are the major employers there. The major employer is the tribal
Yeah.
government.
And they have their own school. I can't even remember 6th or 8th grade.
Yeah. Yeah, the older kids get bused into Madras, to school. Think about how long that day is if you live way out there and the bus. Anyway. Madras, by the way, works really hard. I've read to try to work with, tribal folks who are in the schools there.
Did the Presbyterian Church operate either of the boarding schools?
No,
I know the boarding schools were
not that I know.
handed over to various churches and Presbyterians were part of that.
We actually
There.
are not aware of that history. One of the things that I hope that the next person there does is to talk with some of the older folks, some of the really elderly people about history and get it recorded.
Yeah.
Because we don't know. That's a blank for us in terms of what was our relationship to that school? We don't know. We've had some people tell us, well, after school, they would come over to the church and have really fun activities. We don't know how far back that goes.
Right. One story I have of Arlene, who is there every Sunday, and she grew up in the very northern part of the reservation. There was a small Presbyterian church there, which hasn't been there for a long, long time. And she tells the story of on Sunday morning, she'd put on her best dress, hop on her pony and ride to some national church. She knew her Bible verses that she had to repeat to somebody there. And when church and Sunday school was over, she'd hop on her pony and go back to her residence. She is one who had to be bussed in to town, to Warm Springs for school. And because of the distance from where she lives on the reservation, keep this in mind, she had to stay at school for the week because she couldn't go back and forth.
Think unpaved roads, all that kind of stuff, because that's what it was.
Right. She, though, is quite a woman. She was their first college-educated person. And Jim gave me a little while ago, you haven't publicized this, but there's a First Nations version of the New Testament. I really recommend getting a copy of that and seeing their translation of the New Testament. When I took this copy to Warm Springs to tell them about it, so guess what Arlene had for me? She said, oh, let me look at that in the front page to see who did this, because I have regular conversations with so-and-so, and he's working on some translation of the New Testament. She whips it over. Oh, yeah, he's one of the translators. Somebody from Warm Springs is a biblical scholar to translate from the Greek to native understandings. Go buy one of these and remember Warm Springs. It changes your reading of it.
And again, what a wonderful thing that the next person who's there at the church can begin to explore, get to know this person. And anyway, we see enormous opportunity and enormous need, and we're excited about what God might do.
And Jim, I think it's time to close.
Yeah.
But Jim said that on the commission, my little job is to fill in every Sunday and which pastor, which congregation is going to be in charge of going out to Warm Springs. So hello. You can sign up for any Sunday that isn't already filled in, and you don't have to have your pastor go. Pastors go and they can preach. Take a carload or two and say, we'll help you lead singing. If you have a pianist, Heather loves that. Somebody
She
else
doesn't
would
have
play.
to, yeah.
Somebody could read a scripture, you could meet some people. This doesn't have to be just a solo pastor who happens to be free to go out.
They could discuss the scripture, pray, sing, bring something for the coffee hour afterwards,
Oh,
and just
yeah.
have a lovely morning.
They love to eat, so.
They're having the mass to get ready to, what is the expectation you have in terms of the life of your commission?
It's going to be a while, even after a minister comes, because it's going to be a while for whoever is there to have enough congregation to have a session, a functioning group, and to explore and build that. So, we're there for, I would suspect another couple of years, but who knows?
Who knows?
And you hope to be able to get a pastor.
Later this year.
Mhm.
You
And
can
I
put
don't
that on
think-
your prayer list. I
Yeah.
can tell you what I want. I would like to have a Native American who is a member of AA. And I really mean that. And in recovery.
Yeah.
To lead some of that on the reservation, because it's an enormous issue. And to have that experience would be a great strength.
It's a huge issue. And they can't really operate well with abusive being.
Anything else? Time to go.
One last, thing.
Yeah.
The First Nations version is available for free on Bible.
On the
Oh.
Bible app,
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I didn't
I
know.
bought it at Powell's. Thanks, everybody.
All right.